Hey everybody, Grumos here with some more Warthunder historic battle footage. So, patch 1.35 is out, and one of the planes I wanted to fly when it comes out is the new LA5. And since I need to level up the Russian tree a bit for that, and I thought it would fit nicely to the D5 Stuka I flew last time, I thought I'd give the Tier 5 LA2 a try. The plane plays somewhat similar to the D5, and I use it in a similar role than the D5 for the same reasons. Let's take a look at the plane. The IL-2 is the ground attack plane and probably best known for its heavy armor, which was not just added to the airframe, but is a load-bearing part of the airframe. This construction helped keep the weight of the plane down. Even with its armor, the single-seat IL-2 weighs just a little bit more than a Hellcat, for example. However, don't expect too much from the plane's armor in Warthunder. As a single-engine plane, the IL-2 does not get the damage model boost the game grants to many multi-engine planes, and the IL-2 will not be able to withstand even close to the amount of fire that, for example, PE-2s, Beaufighters or similar aircrafts can currently take. And on top of that, the IL-2 has a few weak points, most notably the wings, which are very vulnerable and easy to damage even by comparably small caliber fire. So if you go for an IL-2, aim for the wings. That usually gets your results very fast. The rear fuselage of the plane is made out of wood and also a weak point. Now let's take a look at the wings. The IL-2 has a very large wing area and pretty thick wings. So even with its weight, the plane, especially the Tier 5 single-seater, has a somewhat low wing loading. That gives the plane the ability to turn quite well, as long as you can keep your speed up. The plane needs to be fast for IL-2 standards to turn well. But of course, with its weight and large wing, the plane bleeds speed very fast in a turn. So you want to have some altitude to trade for speed. If you're forced to turn on low altitude, your maneuverability will soon be a thing of the past. Again, very similar to the D5, and one of the reasons why I play the IL-2 like the D5 in a fire support role versus air targets. Even though the two 23mm cannons can wreak havoc among ground targets, I just think the IL-2 lacks survivability to be effective in this role. With its lack of damage resistance, tail gunner and speed, the only defense against attacking fighters is going on the offensive, using the plane's maneuverability. But to get and keep up this maneuverability, you need some altitude to trade for speed, which you won't have if you are low and slow attacking ground targets. So I feel in the current metagame, the plane is more useful using its cannons to help out fighters with air targets, especially with planes that can soak up a large amount of damage and are hard to shoot down for the fighters. On top of that, I think it's simply more fun. Well, let's take a look at a few fights in the IL-2. This first one is once again showing off the importance that altitude and the ability to trade it for speed has on your maneuverability in a plane like this. At the start, I get a few good hits into a Zero that was passing me. Now, a Zero is of course a dangerous opponent for an IL-2. The Zero is both faster and more maneuverable. But I still think that attack is the best way to deal with them in a situation like this. After all, the Zero is faster and the IL-2 does not have a tail gunner, so if you try to run away, you will most likely just die tired. Now, when I turn after the damaged Zero, a Ki-45 also passes in front of me, and in hindsight, I should have switched targets and used this opportunity to try and take out the Ki-45. But at this time, I was not sure how damaged the Zero really was, and I was worried he was still in the fight and would go after me if I went for the Ki-45. I have to break off the chase as I was threatened to overspeed, but the Zero is at least damaged enough that he has to go back to base and I look for another target. At this point I have a lot of speed from chasing the Zero, and I go after the Ki-61. And as you can see, at this speed the IL-2 can turn very well, and I have enough speed left after the attack to regain some altitude. Looking around and searching for another target, I can see the Ki-45 again, and at lower altitude. So I loop around, hoping to get above him and dive down on him. But he is moving away and gaining distance, and a G4M Betty bomber moves right in front of my guns and distracts me. Now that was a definite mistake. I should have stayed focused on the Ki-45 and dealt with the Betty later, but a bomber right in front of your guns is such a tempting target. I go into a shallow dive to build up some speed and to get closer and hopefully avoid his tail gunner. And just as I am close enough to fire, he goes up in a loop. I follow and get some good hits on his wings and take out his flaps. But the Ki-45 used the opportunity to come back, and now when I loop around, he is on my tail and I am now on low altitude. I did not expect him to come back this fast and did not notice him right away. But after I do see him, I evade in a split S and then use the speed I still had to loop around after him. But the Ki-45 did not turn right away, but got some distance first and then turned and is now coming back in a head-on, which I want to avoid. The 45 has a 37mm cannon after all, and as a twin-engine plane, it will be able to withstand more than the IL-2, so I go up a bit and turn after him. But as you can see, the IL-2 is losing speed very fast doing this, and with those speeds the plane does not turn very well anymore. On top of that, I have only about 400 to 500 meters of altitude left to regain speed. That is the problem when you're too low in this plane and engaged with a fighter. I can barely turn tight enough to stay on him and not tight enough to get the lead to fire most of the time. And he has the necessary speed to pull away from me in a straight line when I do get enough lead. I do manage to stay behind him and try to get him to turn with a few machine gun bursts. But a second Ki-45 shows up behind me and I have to evade again. The newcomer pulls up after his attack and gets some distance again, and I decide to turn around and move away from them to hopefully build up some altitude before I have to maneuver again. Now I have both of them coming for me, and I have to evade both of them at the same time. I do not have enough height to do a proper split S, but I can at least do a low yo-yo to avoid their fire, and loop back up behind one of them. After I do the yo-yo into them to throw off their aim and loop around, I get behind the first Ki-45 again. But again, I'm not fast enough to follow after he continues in a straight line. And now there is one in front of me and one behind me. At this speed I cannot turn tight enough to evade the fire from the one coming from behind if I don't use my last altitude to speed up. But there is so little distance to the ground that I can only gain a small amount of speed back. It is enough to evade this time, but as you can see, thanks to the bad energy retention of the IL-2 in such maneuvers, I lose speed and altitude every time I evade an attack. Normally, I can build up enough speed in a split S to loop around and get behind the opponent, but in this case there was not enough altitude left to get enough speed to do that, and again, to be able to turn tight enough to evade the next attack, I have to put the nose down, and this time there really was almost no altitude left. So, as you can see, as soon as you lack enough height to build up speed properly, you are fighting a losing battle. You may be able to evade a few attacks, but regaining the advantage after your altitude is gone is hard. Well, let's take a look at another fight on Korea. It's a relatively small match and there are two fighters, a bow fighter and two bombers, a A-20 and a Beaufort on the enemy team. From the targets I can see right now, the Bowfighter is the most dangerous and the highest, so I want to go for him first. I had a good altitude advantage over him, so I could build up a good amount of speed before attacking, and as you can see, the IL-2 turns very well when fast enough. Now there are fighters on the minimap near me and I look around to try to find out what it is. It's a boomerang, but he's not going for me, instead he's chasing a Yak-7, the only fighter on our team. So I do a split S and come around to go after the boomerang while he is attacking the Yak-7. That is what I meant by fire support role. When a furball develops, use your heavy armament to join in and take out opponents fast. I hoped that I was fast enough to save the Yak-7, but it looks like I came a second too late and he goes down. Now I want to regain some altitude before attacking another target, as you have seen in the last fight what can happen if you lose too much of it. But a Wildcat, the last fighter on the enemy team, is coming for me before I can get quite as high as I would have hoped. I turn into him and put the nose down to get as much speed as possible, and when he is about to pass me I pull up in a loop and roll in behind him. The maneuver cost me a lot of speed as I could not build up as much as I would have hoped in the short time I had. But it seems he eases up on his turn just a bit and that's enough to get a hit in, which damages him and the Wildcat tries to make a run for it. I follow and I spray after him a bit every now and then, hoping to make him turn a bit so he won't get away. While I chase him, we pass over one of the two Beauforts in the match, and I'm not sure for a second if I want to switch targets. But I decide to stay on the Wildcat to make sure he goes down, as the Beaufort is no real threat at this point. I get closer to the Wildcat and eventually take out his tail control. Now I can go back for the Beaufort, but he crashes. That leaves an A-20 and a second Beaufort for the enemy team, and there is one more bomber left on my team. Now A-20s have an extremely strong elevator authority. You have to be careful when attacking them. Don't underestimate them, they might surprise you. I, for example, did not expect this A-20 to be able to come up to me like that, and as a result I took some hits. Luckily the damage is not too bad. There's a slight instability when turning tight thanks to the damaged rear fuselage, but nothing major. So after this I climb again. I don't know if he's coming back or if he keeps going, but I want to have the ability to dive to get speed to either maneuver or try to chase. I don't get to climb for very long. He does turn around and I descend again in preparation to avoid his attack. As usual, I pull up when he is about to fire and then come around in a barrel roll behind him. The damage to the plane makes this all a little wobbly, but it works well enough, and when he comes down again I get a good hit in and a critical. I am not sure how much damage I really did, but he's moving away for now, and when he's turning around the next time, he's not coming for a head-on like the first time, he's just passing in front of me, so I get more hits and that's enough. That leaves only the last Beaufort on the enemy team, which just arrived back on the scene to drop some more bombs. And after he is down, that is it for this match. Well then, let's take a look at one last round, again on the Korea map. At the start of this match, there's a Beaufighter below me fighting with a Yak-1, and I want to help take out the bow. There are quite a few of them in this match and I would like to reduce their number as soon as possible. Coming down from a few thousand meters I have to be careful not to overspeed, so I descend with 0% throttle and pull up a bit every now and again to not get too fast. After I am low enough to engage, I throttle back up again to not lose too much energy in a turn and go after the bow. I get a hit in the first pass, but nothing big, so I pull up in a high yo-yo to come back down for another attack. Again, I get a few hits and this time a critical too. Now I want to gain some altitude and re-evaluate the situation before I continue to attack. But it seems the damage I did to the Beaufighter was enough and he went down. So I climb away from the fight to regain altitude and hopefully to get the chance to attack from above again. There is a P-25 in front of me, so he would be a good target to bounce, so I move in his general direction. Before I get the chance to do that though, I notice another Beaufighter behind me coming for me. So as I usually do in a situation like this, I go into a split S, gain some speed, and when the attacker is close enough I pull into him and then use a barrel roll to get behind him. He is turning in front of me, giving me the chance to close in on him and get a good burst in a deflection shot that takes him out. So now I go back to the original plan and climb away a bit from the fight. The P-25 is still there, so I keep an eye on him in case there's a good opportunity to bounce him, or if he's coming my direction. P-25s have a few fixed 50 cals after all, and they like to use them when they get the chance. But there are more planes approaching from behind, a Spitfire which is chasing a Yak-1, and another apparently damaged Beaufighter which is coming for me. I would like to help the Yak-1 with the Spitfire, but I can't as long as the Beau is pointing his guns at me. Luckily for me and the Yak-1 though, the Beau is apparently too damaged and turns back to base to repair. So I dive after the Spitfire, hoping to reach it before it reaches the Yak-1. Thanks to the speed from the dive, I catch up to the Spitfire slowly, but I fear I'm not fast enough and he may reach the Yak first. So I fire a few bursts at long range to get his attention and make him turn. After a few hits, he does finally decide to break off his attack and he pulls up hard, but with the speed I had built up earlier, the IL-2 can pull up hard enough to get enough lead to fire in this situation. Now, after I went back to rearm, there are only 2 planes left on both sides. My IL-2 and an I-16 on my team, and a Beaufighter and a bomber on the enemy's team. I meet the Beaufighter pretty high up and turn after him after avoiding a head-on. But this time the Beaufighter does not turn and I follow him. But here I make a fatal mistake. The Beau ends up above me, and even though I expect him to bounce me and I want to evade, my own plane is in the way and I can't see him, and I notice too late that he already started his move, and I react too late to avoid it. An unnecessary mistake that cost me the game, but those things happen. It was still a nice match. Well, that was it for this video. I hope it was entertaining. Thanks for watching and maybe I'll see you next time.